What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 3 and Out YouTube page. I'm John Middlekauff, and we are talking football all day, every day. Make sure you subscribe, like the video, share it with your friends. Let's roll, baby. What is going on, everybody? Happy Fugazi Friday. And the Chicago Bears have been tabbed for Hard Knocks. And like most teams, they, I'm sure, want no part of it. But why I think Hard Knocks in general, the operation surrounding it with the microphones and the cameras, are they overrated in 2024? Jaylen Waddle, Miami Dolphins, I don't want to say superstar is Tyreek Hill, but stud wide receiver, gets a large contract. Justin Jefferson, there were some rumors about him getting traded around the draft. What is Minnesota going to do? The 49ers offensive line coach had a press conference yesterday and gave a pretty interesting insight to the way he and I think the team feels about how they would draft skill guys over offensive linemen if all things are equal. And the SEC is going to do something, follow the Big Ten's lead on this. That is something the NFL has been doing for a long time, and it revolves around gambling. And I got a quick Fugazi Friday that is actually kind of NFL related. But before we dive in to some football, or as they say in Mexico, football Americano, that I plan on getting out of the house Saturday night, having a little fun, letting the hair that I don't have down, having a few brewskis, and singing some songs. Luke Combs is coming to, I'd say Scottsdale, but it's actually Glendale because they built the football stadium out in BFE, but I'm going. And I'm going for one reason and one reason only. My friends at Gametime. I have been to more events, more concerts, more games. I went to an NHL game than I have probably in 5 years combined since this partnership, the official ticketing app of this podcast began last year, January 1st. I think it was January 1st, might have been February, but here's the thing. Do you want to go to a concert? Do you want to go to a comedy show? Do you want to get out this summer, go to a baseball game, take in some sun, have a few pops, put your feet up, have some peanuts, some sunflower seeds, watch a little hardball? You can go to anything. Obviously, this fall with football, they are taking care of you because all you got to do is use the promo code John. So buying tickets doesn't get any easier. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code John for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply again. Create an account, redeem the code JOHN for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. I think it's pretty funny that once something gets established, like this is difficult, it's difficult forever. It's like, yeah, things kind of change. Like back in the day, 20, 25 years ago, whenever Hard Knocks first started, it was probably very intrusive to have multiple cameras following you everywhere around. When I was a kid, my mom, to get the pictures, I don't even know the right adjective to describe it, published, you would have to go to Long's Drugs in the middle of Davis and wait a couple days, and then they would have your photos. Remember those things, if you're my age or older, those 3-ring binders that you'd all have whenever you go to families' houses, they'd all have, all your friends, just full of photos? Now that's called the iPhone. And I had some friends that had personal recorders, some like legit cameras. They were pretty big, handheld cameras. Again, all on the iPhone. Press conferences and media and all that stuff used to be a really, really big deal. Now I think all these guys are really numb to it. Because one, think how many teams, I'm pretty sure every single one, puts out like in-depth videos leading up through free agency, the draft, and then on draft night with their own camera crew. Camera, boom mic. I watched the Jags and Trent Baalke last night. There's a fucking boom mic in the draft room. I haven't been in the draft room for a while, but it wasn't in 1997. In the 2012, 2013, and the Eagles were on the forefront of this with cameras, with in-house production. None of that existed. Well, I'd say for the last several years, all the teams in the league are all doing it. So the coaches are kind of numb to being mic'd up and having a camera around them in their own building. Most of you, I would imagine, listening haven't been to like an NFL press conference. But if you go to one with a coach and definitely a player in a locker room, every single person interviewing them basically has their camera up and the light on. And these players are so numb to it, everything they do on record is on camera. So forever, this notion was like, oh, the intrusive nature of Hard Knocks, the cameras, mics. That probably was true in 2006. It was a lot. Because you weren't used to seeing people walk around with cameras beside on game day. Well, in 2024, I could go to the local deli and 3 people are filming themselves eating a roast beef sandwich. Times have changed. And no one knows that more than players and coaches. So Hard Knocks probably used to be a major pain in the ass. Obviously, it's not ideal, but I think it's never been less of a hindrance on the operation of training camp. And here's the other thing, and I've been saying this for a while. Hard Knocks is not for me. It is no longer for me. It doesn't mean because of this job, definitely last year with Aaron Rodgers and the Jets, and this year with Caleb Williams, I'm going to watch because that's kind of what I do for a living, though I don't really like it. Because the Hard Knocks I grew up on, like most people in the 2000s, was so raw, real, and authentic. You got inside the coaches and front office, the round table of the meetings about personnel, and them essentially talking shit about guys, who to cut, what was going to go on, because that's really what happens. You no longer get any of that. Watching the Turk go get guys, you barely see that anymore. You get a little taste of it, but I would say relative to what it used to be, it's been cut by like 90%. So to me, who's also worked in it and seen what really gets said and the way people really talk, it doesn't do much for me. But maybe I'm not the audience anymore, and that's okay. But I understand the power of the NFL, the popularity of the NFL. It used to just be training camp Hard Knocks, 4 or 5 episodes. Now they're literally having an off-season Hard Knocks with the New York Giants. And then they're going to have an in-season Hard Knocks with some team. So basically going year-round. While all these teams are doing in-house production that is kind of similar. So we are inundated with content, which is cool. Like I'm not pushing back against that. But Hard Knocks to me used to be something very different than it is now. Obviously, the power of social media, seeing guys cut, teams are very sensitive to that. And I understand from their end, like, I don't want you in when the GM and the coach are talking about who's being shitty and who's not going to make the team. But we did used to get that 20 years ago. At least it felt like we got a lot more because we did. Now we don't. And I don't expect that this fall. But it's also why the players, they don't really care. But the coaches and GM, especially Ryan Poles, who's not some big, like, talking to the media all the time guy, is surely not going to like this. But he has full editorial control. Like, they're not going to post anything he doesn't want them to post in the show. So I'm sure the reaction inside Hallis Hall today is like, this sucks. Eberflus, Poles, Ian Cunningham is assistant GM. But at the end of the day, I actually think it could be pretty good in the sense of, like, you got a lot of buzz on your team. People want to see Caleb Williams. This franchise has been down at what feels like for a long time. And now a lot of people are very interested in your operation. The other thing is, like, Hard Knocks was always a death sentence. Like, if you went on Hard Knocks, you were going to suck. Well, 2 years ago, the Lions went on Hard Knocks. It was good, mainly because Dan Campbell. And I usually think the strength of a Hard Knocks is the head coach. If the head coach is a big personality, it can carry the show. Remember Bill O'Brien, Rex Ryan, obviously Dan Campbell. To me, it was more enjoyable than the Jets last year with the Solace. He's just not as entertaining that way. And I don't expect Eberflus to, be Leo DiCaprio behind the camera. But the thing with Hard Knocks the last couple of years, the Lions started, I think, 1-5. But by the end of the season, when they beat the Packers in Aaron Rodgers' last game, they clearly were one of the better teams in the league that second half. And if you take the second half of last season and then this season, you could make the argument that only the Chiefs and Niners have been better during that time. Obviously, last year, the moment Aaron Rodgers' Achilles rips in half, their season was over. It had nothing to do with the cameras or the microphones. Now, were they going to be as good as people like me thought? Who knows? It could have been a major struggle with their offensive line, and maybe they wouldn't have been as good. They clearly would not have been as bad as they were with Zach Wilson, right? But would they have been a legitimate playoff contender? No one will ever know. We'll get to potentially see this year if he can stay healthy. But I don't think Hard Knocks has any impact on your success or failure once the season starts. Because I think looking back, the distraction was probably a big deal. Guys weren't as focused. Guys were screwing around. Guys were trying to be actors for the camera. Like I said, I think most of these guys, think how Caleb Williams has been in the spotlight for probably like 5 years. He was one of the biggest recruits in the country. He then went to Oklahoma where he was trying to beat out Spencer Rattler, who's now an NFL player. And then he transferred to USC, probably, at least so far, an unprecedented NIL deal. What Jaden Rashad thought he was getting from Florida. Caleb actually got that in Southern California. So he's used to the camera being around. All these guys are numb to it. Hell, Keenan Allen's bet on this before. The Chargers when they had the dual Hard Knocks with the Rams. So I think this is really overblown now. Like I said, I understand being a team, you'd rather not have it than have it. But I don't think it's anywhere near what it once was, like when I was in college in 2005. We are this close to crowning an NBA champ. And with action heating up on the court, it's even hotter at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. There are only so many games left, and DraftKings Sportsbook has you covered with same-game parlays, live betting, odds boost, and so much more. Don't miss out, or you'll have to wait until the next NBA season to place your bets. It's super easy for first-timers to get started. Try betting on something simple, like picking a team to win. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app, select your squad, and place your first bet. It's that simple. New to DraftKings? Listen up. New customers can get a no-sweat bet up to $1,500. Just deposit at least $5, and you'll get a bonus bet back equal to your first bet if it doesn't hit. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use the code JOHN. That's code JOHN for new customers to get a no-sweat bet up to $1,500 if your first bet doesn't hit. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Contracts are all about comps. They're all about comps. It's why consistently we see the next player at a position, get 1% or 2% more than the previous guy when they've put up similar numbers, right? So when you see Jaylen Waddle get a $76 million guaranteed extension, and then you look at his stats, he's been in the low 70s the last couple years in catches, over 1,000 yards both years. Because whenever I hear, Brandon Aiyuk, it's only going up. Well, Brandon Aiyuk has nothing in common with Ja'Marr Chase or Justin Jefferson. Those guys are in a different universe than him. They are absolute number one wide receivers who can carry your team and produce at the highest level possible. That's well known. Where we've seen two other guys in the same draft class, Jaylen Waddle, Devontae Smith, be number 2 wide receivers on their team. And they're both really good, just like Brandon Aiyuk. And they both get a contract in a ballpark that is right at the same level. So when I see Jaylen Waddle get this contract, I go, that's Brandon Aiyuk's contract. And now the only question is, are the 49ers willing to give him that? Because if Brandon thinks he's getting something in some different stratosphere than that number, then his agent is living on Mars. Because that's the number. Like that's what we're talking about. Where I think it gets complicated is for the Minnesota Vikings. Justin Jefferson's like, hey guys, I got nothing in common with these number 2 wide receivers. You're looking at arguably the best wide receiver in the league, Haas. So that $76 million, I'm going to need 100. And to me, that's probably the starting point of the conversation with Justin Jefferson and the number he's looking to get. And I bet Minnesota would like that number probably in the 80s. And maybe they end up at like $96, $95 million. But his number's in a different world, just like Ja'Marr Chase's. But this is Brandon Aiyuk's contract. Now the question is, with the 49ers, are they willing to give him this money? Now, what makes it a little more complicated, and this is no one's fault because draft slots or draft spots are slotted, is when you are drafted really high, like Jaylen Waddle. He was the 6th pick in the draft. When he signed his rookie contract, whether he was good or the worst player in NFL history, 4 years, $27 million guaranteed, no matter what. Whether he caught one ball or 7,000 balls, it didn't matter. Same thing with Brandon Aiyuk, but he was drafted way later, pick 27. He got a 4-year, $12 million contract. So Jaylen Waddle already has made double what Brandon Aiyuk has. So sometimes you get some of these guys that haven't made as much money because they weren't as, drafted as high. They can draw a harder line. And sometimes it works the other way. They haven't made as much money and you just throw a little cash in front of them and they sign. Like Nico Collins, one of the best deals potentially in the league. Because if he just maintains his level of play, he's every bit the player of Jaylen Waddle or Brandon Aiyuk. Yet from a guaranteed dollars perspective, he's way cheaper. Now his resume is shorter. He hasn't been doing it at the same length, or the same, year in, year out. But I think he would say, look at the fuck, I was playing with a quarterback. I got CJ Stroud. Look at my numbers. So these are complicated conversations. It's why when I see this story break over the last week, that Minnesota was open to trading Justin Jefferson. Well, of course they were, because they let Kirk Cousins walk. They were going to go all in on a rookie quarterback who was a redshirt. Isn't that the time to reset everything? When your team might not be good for a couple years, that is not the time to pay $100 million to a wide receiver. We talk about this a lot with Devontae, and I understand Devontae's very prideful in the Raiders. It means a lot because it was his family's team. He has some family that couldn't travel to Green Bay that's been able to see him play. I understand all that. And, Devontae he didn't win a Super Bowl, but played in a ton of playoff games, saw the highest level of football when he was in Green Bay. But you put him on a bad team. I don't care how many numbers he puts up. A couple years ago, he was awesome. Team didn't sniff the playoffs. So you got to be careful, like how you're allocating your resources. Now, if you also go, well, I'm not paying my quarterback anything, shouldn't I be investing in these other players? Totally hear that too. It's all a preference, how you want the team built. But part of being a GM and part of being in a front office is kind of being open to everything. So if they would have gotten 2 1s and 2 2s during the draft for Justin Jefferson, probably made some sense. Here's the one problem, though. The teams that might be kind of interested in doing something like that would probably be the good teams. So the teams with established quarterbacks that would trade you a ton and probably going to be drafting in the mid-20s for a couple years. That's not ideal. Now, things can change. Look at the Lions with the LA Rams and that pick. Like, you never know. But, and I'm not Buffalo's cap space, but let's say the Bills or a team like that, the Chiefs. Hey, we'll give you 2 1s and 2 2s for this player. And again, obviously I'm not factoring in the cap. I'm just saying if that's on the table, or the Baltimore Ravens or whatever, more than likely that pick, worst case, is going to be like 26. So it's like, should we just keep them? And then the teams that are drafting really high, why wouldn't they just take a wide receiver that might turn into 85, 90% of Justin Jefferson for a quarter of the price? It's where these deals can be pretty complicated. It's why a lot of these times guys don't get traded. And we've seen guys get traded, that were already established. Tyreek Hill went for a 1 and a 2. Same thing with Devontae Adams. Or maybe a 1 and a 3. I have to look back up. And those guys were established like Hall of Fame level talents at the time of the trade. And Justin is, definitely trending that way. A couple more years, it will be undeniable. But these situations are complicated because this is not baseball where it's an uncapped league. And I know there are tax ramifications if you get to a certain level. But you have to factor in big picture how you're building your team. Now, I'd argue when this guy's on the field, he's worth keeping on your team, especially for a young project quarterback. But I do think it's fair to say, and I know they push back about this, but it's been pretty well documented now. several times that like they were open to it. Doesn't mean that they got close to doing it. It doesn't mean there was an offer that got to that point, but most teams are this way. Most teams are this way. And we've talked about this before. Like, there are certain players, there's no offer that I'm going to trade you for. Like, you can call me about Josh Allen all day long. I'm never trading you Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes. But there are other players like Trent Williams. The Niners are very beholden to Trent Williams. They have 4 average offensive linemen in him, an all-time great Hall of Famer. But if someone called Kyle Shanahan right now and John Lynch and said, hey, we'll give you 2 1s, 2 2s, and a player, you have to have the conversation, even though it's like, hey, who's going to play left tackle for us? Be a big loss. He also 35. He could retire after this year. Like, this is what happens in the NFL. Now, when the dust settles, I expect him to be a Minnesota Viking, but they're also run by an analytically driven GM. And typically guys from a finance background are always balancing ROI. What type of ROI are we going to get out of this player in the near future as we're working through a quarterback? I could just see it being all on the table. Now, it doesn't make sense to trade him now, right? You would have traded him during the draft, but I bet their offers for the draft weren't that great. And I think sometimes with a defensive lineman, Khalil Mack, it's easy to give the farm. But you've seen other positions, it's like, was that really worth it? Like, if the Raiders could do it again, and this is, Devontae is one of my favorite players in the NFL. I'm pro Devontae Adams. They would not do that deal. Not because he's not a really good player, not because he's not a really good leader and just a guy you want your young players to emulate, because it doesn't make football sense. It doesn't make football sense. Tyreek, turns out that team was a little closer. You put him with Jaylen Waddle, and you have one of the best duos in the league. And it helps your quarterback that you just drafted number 5 overall. Like, that deal makes a lot of sense. The Devontae Adams deal, looking back, does not. And look at the guys that did that deal, both fired. Neither have a job in the NFL. So these situations, when the money now, and I know the cap's going up every single year, it's still very complicated. Nico Collins deal, that's easy to do. Caserio probably wouldn't admit this, probably one of the easier deals he's ever done. It's like, listen, I guess he could get injured or whatever, but we feel pretty good, especially where the market is. We're paying whatever, less 30, 40% less than some of these guys on guaranteed money. We love this player. Now with this young quarterback, no brainer. Jawan Jennings type deals are the easiest deals in the league. It's like, wait, this guy's on our team. We guarantee him $10 million. Once you get above, the old 50 is probably the new 70, 75. If you have a star defensive player, it's $100+ million. And think about all the guys that have signed for $100+ million. Bosa, both Bosa brothers, Myles Garrett. You know how good those guys are. Like, there's no disputing it. But when you allocate that much money, look at Joey. Joey gets hurt a lot. Now, you could argue he got hurt, a lot before that. But in general, when he's been on the field, he's been a high-end player. But the moment that guy starts getting banged up and you're allocating that many resources from a financial standpoint on your cap and your true cash, it's a problem. Obviously, with the quarterback, when that doesn't work out, holy cannoli. Look at Deshaun Watson. It's been a disaster. Russell Wilson, one of the worst contracts in sports history, really, so far. Less than 2 years later, he was benched and cut. Like, well, look at his numbers. Don't hear that many people crying for him. Wasn't that good. But be interesting to see when this Justin Jefferson, the dust settles. Could be a while. Same thing with Jamar Chase. Chris Foerster, the 49ers offensive line coach. I think it's fair to say he's one of the better coaches in the league for sure. Most famously known for doing a little booger sugar on his desk in Miami with his stripper girlfriend, but that's a long time ago. Going through a rough time, I think rough divorce. I watched some of his press conferences. I've always been pretty impressed, and I've seen him win. You subtract Trent Williams, who I could coach, but the other 4 guys over the course of the last 3 or 4 years would get exposed on other teams. This is where scheme really matters in football. The zone running scheme is something where you can get away with a lot of average players if they have good foot quickness. And he basically admitted as such. He said, we've won a lot of games with a lot of guys who are right there at the line. And he basically described the line of, if you can just block someone and just function as an average starter, we can win with you here. Now, if you're below that line and you can't block people, I don't care what plays, what scheme you're running, we're in trouble. But we don't need Trent Williams. I mean, we need Trent Williams at every position to win. And he essentially said in the draft that if all things are equal, I will promote as the offensive line coach. And as clear as this organization, we want guys that touch the ball over the guys that block. Because if you can just give me someone that I can work with, he's like, my right tackle could be average. And if he has a great block on a quick screen to a wide receiver, and that guy gets tackled 3 yards past the line of scrimmage, nobody cares. But if that guy whiffs on that quick screen and the quarterback gets it to Debo and Debo takes it 60 yards, no one ever notices that whiff. And I think the power of having, I saw this in the NFL when I was there, not too often because most of the coaches were on the same page for Andy, but I hear stories about it all over since I've been out, is how many assistant coaches are given players that they do not want. And then let's face it, we're all human beings. You don't give the same effort. And when everyone's not on the same page in these drafts, the assistant coaches, the coordinators, the head coach, and the front office, you got problems. So typically, if you told me an offensive line coach, who would he want during the draft? I'd say offensive lineman all the time. And he even said, like, I got no problem with it. I would have taken a wide receiver too. Because those guys in this game we're playing, given how good I am as an offensive line coach, and this is the power of good position coaches, because I can give you less of a talent and I can win with them. The amount of games the 49ers won with Mike McGlinchey is insanity to me. Really. I mean, he can't pass block. And then he leaves for $55 million to Sean Payton, which is still one of the crazier contracts I've ever seen. Because you don't get paid to run block in the NFL. You get paid to protect the quarterback. And then they went to Colton McKivitz, and there was no drop-off because of this guy. Anyone that follows football, you hear about Jeff Stoutland all the time in Philadelphia. Whatever he's making, he's underpaid. I've seen it with the 49ers defensive line coach, Chris Kasarik. He takes random players, Arden Key, Cleveland Farrell, guys who have failed other places. Nick Bosa is going to be successful with whoever he plays for. Anyone in the NFL can coach Nick Bosa. Nick Bosa, Myles Garrett, right? Tyreek Hill. These guys are going to be stars no matter where they go. But what about all the other players? Because you're investing all your financial resources into that guy. You're going to have less resources than some other guys. And you're going to need them to produce. So when my position coach can get the most out of, hey, I can take a 5th rounder and he can be our starting right guard. I can take a 7th rounder and he can be my starting right tackle. And it's one thing to be like, yeah, some guys start in the NFL on 3-win teams. No, we're going to win 12, 13 games, and we're going to be competing for the Super Bowl. That's why you pay certain position coaches premiums, because they're worth their weight in gold. And it's hard to quantify, but in the NFL, and it's clear if you're a fan of a team, like, you know the good position coaches, you know the bad position coaches. Just watch their unit. That's the thing with football. Like in basketball, I got no clue if you're a good coach or a bad coach. Like Jason Kidd, I've been following his career since he was a player. Is he a good coach? Is he a bad coach? I know clearly he's probably good communicating basketball and leading men, right, as a point guard. But, like, what's he actually doing with Luka and Kyrie? I don't know. But you know in football, like, yeah, this works. This is going to play. Or this is not going to play, especially at the highest level. And that's always the uncertainty for the shitty teams. Like, how many good players do you actually have? How many players do you have that you can win with? Because you might have half your team could be average players. If it's balanced out with high-end players, those guys, those average players can become winning players. And they become winning players because of the scheme and because of the coaching and because everyone's on the same page. There's not one guy that's like, I should have got an extra player in the 3rd round. we were going to draft a wide receiver and we never did. And that's not to say, like, I saw a clip when the Colts drafted, what's his name? The wide receiver from Texas in the second round. And they went to Reggie Wayne, who's their wide receiver coach, and he was going nuts. Like, obviously, you get excited when you draft players that you like as a position coach. But are you on the same page with the vision of the operation? And know that, hey, not every guy is going to be Reggie Wayne. You're going to have to coach some John Middlekauffs, and you're going to be depending on that guy some games. So he better be able to know what he's doing and produce. The SEC is going to start doing injury reports. I guess the Big Ten last year, 2 hours before game time, did these. Here's a reality. The SEC and the Big Ten, this thing's going to morph into NFL light. Eventually, I don't know if it's in 5 years, 10 years, 12 years, they're going to be two big conferences, and they're all going to play each other. And I know Coward right now is trying to defend the Trojans. The Trojans are an embarrassment right now. Backing out of the LSU game, there is no defending this. This is not year one of Lincoln Riley. This is year 3. I'm paying him $120 million to win national championships. We shouldn't be dodging anybody. As my guy Pat Hill used to say, the USC Trojans by this point should want to play anybody, anytime, anywhere. Because ultimately, Georgia, Bama, whatever, they would feel good about winning that game. We all don't feel good about USC winning that game. But we talked about that yesterday. It's an awful look. It really is. But you should have injury reports. Now, do they need to be 3 days a week like the NFL? If you just did a universal injury report on Friday, after your Friday practice, of basically who's up and who's down and who's questionable, that to me is more than enough. But like, we're talking big business now. We're talking billions of dollars. Everyone's getting paid. Players, coaches, networks are all involved. Obviously, we're balls deep with the gambling company. Let's all get on the same page. And let's all do this. It actually makes it easier on the coaches. You don't need to hide from any of this stuff. Kind of play that cloak and dagger game. I'm like, yeah, he's kind of practiced. He's, no, he's up. We plan on him playing. I don't know how well, but we plan on him playing. No, he's a no-go. That's where we're at today with football. And I think the SEC and the Big Ten, it's inevitable where we're headed. But this is a good first start. Not that it has a huge impact on gambling from the sense of like, they can still fudge it a little bit, but like, you want to be real. You want to be what this is becoming. Like this is a smart step. Okay, Fugazi Friday. It's got to be NFL contracts. It's got to be NFL contracts. Because all I hear, Christian McCaffrey's contract that he signed years ago, $16 million a year. He's the highest paid running back in NFL history, and no one has eclipsed him since. And I looked at his contract, and I go, well, he's not making $16 million. He's got 2 years left. He's making under $12 million these next 2 years. So all I see on the internet is he makes $16 million a year. And agents love to say that. Jaylen Waddle, $28.3 million a year. I've always said, nothing is more overrated than average per year salary in the NFL. In the NBA, it's usually like he makes 30 this year, 31 next year, 32 the next year, all guaranteed. Signed a $93 million contract. That is not the way these NFL contracts work. So currently, voluntary, McCaffrey hasn't been around for a couple weeks. People are like, guys, he's getting married to Olivia, former Miss USA. Practice 3 days. It's pretty clear. I've done my digging. I got a few sources on the places around that have heard some things. Pretty clear the guy wants a raise. Don't blame him. Scored 21 touchdowns last year. Carried the Niners at certain times on offense. We all agreed one of the best players in the league. And if I was him and I saw, well, he makes $16 million a year, I say, bullshit. I make 11.8. And for me, for you, for most people, take $11.8 million, 100%. You You want to pay me $11.8 million tomorrow? I'm there. But if you're Christian McCaffrey, you go, listen, this ain't enough money. And this is where these NFL contracts kind of get, in this weird space of, well, he was paid a signing bonus 4 years ago. And then that money gets on the books spread out over time. So you can say it's that much money. But that money was paid a long time ago. He probably bought a house or two cents with that money. That money's gone. Or in savings or in the market or whatever. The money the 49ers owe me, which they didn't pay me that signing bonus. Another team did. So what you're paying me, the contract you inherited, ain't sniffing the toppest paid running back in the NFL. And we all know that I am. So I fully support if I'm Christian McCaffrey, like, listen, Kyle, I'm not going to make a big stink, not going to make a big, dog and pony show around this, but I'm not playing for this number. I'm not asking for $30 million a year. I get it. I play running back, even though I catch about 70 balls a year and scored 7 touchdowns receiving. And I'm probably right there with like Marshall Faulk and LaDainian Tomlinson as one of the great pass-catching running backs in the history of the league. But this number ain't working. And this Fugazi of my contract, you guys don't get credit for the signing bonus. You inherited a contract with no guaranteed money left, essentially, after that first year. So I'm going to need a raise. And we're going to need to get this from 11.8. If I was McCaffrey, I'd want about $20 million. I don't think I could play for less than 19. It's like, wait, you're prepared to pay Brandon Aiyuk $29 million a year. I almost caught as many balls as him. Oh, I happen to lead the league in rushing and have 14 touchdowns on the ground. So, listen, I always push back most of these running backs, pretty replaceable. This guy, when he's healthy, is not. Now, I also understand it from the 49ers standpoint. You play running back. This is the market. I know this. Christian McCaffrey is beloved by the head coach. I'm like, hey, listen, I ain't bleeding again till we update this thing because this ain't working for me. And if I read one more fucking person in the media say I make a number that I do not make, I'm gonna puke in my mouth because it's just, and this happens constantly. This guy makes so-and-so, and then all of a sudden he's cut. And it's like, well, he would have made this, and he had 3 years left on his contract that were unguaranteed. It's all just, these contracts are a giant Fugazi. It's why the quarterback contracts are the one with the giant amount of guaranteed money that you are kind of stuck. The Broncos were shit out of luck. It's like, what are you going to do? Well, just cut them and eat it. But no one does that with other positions. It's why you got to be very hesitant about signing these players now. I mean, these guards are signing $60, $70 million contracts. Wide receivers signing $70, $80 million contracts. Obviously, high-end defensive linemen, where you do feel good about signing Myles Garrett or Nick Bosa. You're just terrified if they ever get injured, you're screwed. But that's part of football. But man, I see constantly he makes $16 million a year, and he just doesn't. Like, the 49ers do not have to pay him $16 million a year these next 2 years. They're way short of that. It's in the 11s. So I just, that's something that's been driving me wild. And other than that, I don't really have any other Fugazis beside, listen, all I've ever heard is Arizona being the hottest place ever. And don't get me wrong, it's really hot. Last year had 30 straight days over 115 degrees. Even though I was talking today with a guy from Montana, a guy named Lenny, and he was telling me, coldest he's ever felt is minus 45, 50 degrees. And he's like, consistently gets well below zero where he's from. And it's just freezing cold. And I said, what would you take? He said, I'll take heat every day of the week. I'm like, that's why the snowbirds exist. But I'll be the first to admit, once you get over 110, it is extremely hot. You're moving to Arizona, it's so hot. It was 106 degrees when I lived in Walnut Creek. It was 112 degrees when I lived in Fresno. It's hot in California too. But I drove 3 hours up to the mountains, a place called Pine Top, a little lake, couple lakes. It's 75 degrees. It was beautiful. And it is crazy how many places that you would never go to, that if you just didn't move there, and I probably never, ever, if I had never moved to Arizona, would have ended up there. And then I started driving around. They had 3 golf courses. A couple of them were sweet. A couple country clubs. I'm like, shit, I'd buy a cabin there and join that club. And don't Don't let people tell you that everywhere in Arizona is scalding hot, because this place, Pine Top, as well as Flagstaff, you go there, it's like 76 degrees. Beautiful.